Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We're going to be looking at the topic of should audit committees have more than one financial expert? And joining me, and somebody who is a familiar face again on this show, is Cindy Fornelli, who's the Executive Director for the Center of Audit Quality. Welcome, Cindy.
Thanks, TK.
So you and I have had our share of healthy discussions where they've been controversial topics. We haven't always agreed, but we're going to have to put this, we're going to find out. It's certainly, this is going to be a healthy discussion. We'll have to find out whether we agree or not agree on this. And with the issue of financial experts, why don't you take a moment and frame the pros and the cons of having more than one or one on your board?
Well, I'm going to back up a step even more and talk about the definition of a financial expert, because that's also been part of the discussion. Is it a robust enough definition, or does that need to be changed? And so, to give you some data on the number of financial experts and whether or not there should be a change in the definition, we in 2013 at the CAQ went out and had a series of discussions globally with audit committee chairs and asked these very questions. And what audit committee members across the globe, and it was pretty unanimous, their thoughts, was that they needed the flexibility to be able to have the financial expert as they defined it within parameters set by regulators, as well as the number of financial experts that they had. So to a person, they said, we really need that flexibility. There should be some parameters, and most felt that the definition that's put in Sarbanes-Oxley is actually a good definition and gives the right amount of flexibility. The other thing we've done over the last 2 years is we've looked at the S&P 500 and looked at the number of financial experts that those companies have disclosed. And all of the companies in the S&P 500 have disclosed that they have at least one financial expert. And just over half, 51%, have 3 financial experts on their audit committee, which I found surprising. I would have thought it would have been a little less than that. And then 20% have 2, and then the rest have just the 1. So I thought those were interesting findings that certainly boards value being able to have as many financial experts as they want, but indeed, at least at the largest public companies in the United States, more than half, just over half, have 3.
So that's interesting data, and if I were to give you the results of my own survey, meaning talking to chairs, a majority of the audit chairs that I talk to, if they're the financial expert, they feel great comfort in at least having one other or even 2 other financial experts on, and that seems to make sense. I mean, if I were that financial expert, I wouldn't want all of the focus or the pressure on me to be the only one that's reviewing the complexity of today's company. And I'm sure that marries with what you've seen in your study as well.
Yeah, I definitely hear that all the time from audit committees, that a best practice is to have at least 2 financial experts on the audit committee for the very reasons that you cite. Nobody wants that sole responsibility of being the financial expert. And as more and more things come on to the audit committee's plates, they want a little bit of cover, if you will, or want to share that responsibility to oversee the financial reporting process with that expertise. But The other thing I hear constantly, though, is we need to have the flexibility, because as we're looking at things like cyber, as enterprise risk management becomes more difficult, as the compliance and regulatory regime also is more complex, we as a board and we as an audit committee need the flexibility to be able to put whom we need at that point in time on our audit committee. So in short, the answer seems to be we don't want it to be required that we have more than one financial expert, but we should have more than one financial expert on the audit committee.
Yeah, but you are required to have your one, okay?
Well, you're required to disclose if you don't.
Right.
That's correct.
Let's just look at the example if you did only have one and they were the chair and for some reason they had to leave the board. I would think that it would be much tougher to go out and try and find, do a recruitment and find them, get them up to speed, get them going, than it would be to have somebody, to have a successor on the board. When Doug Main was in on the show, where we all sat together weeks ago, we talked about that. We talked about the importance of having somebody to mentor to be able to take that position. So wouldn't that be another positive reason for having a second financial expert? Whether you decided, in your case, the flexibility, whether he's on the audit committee or not, having somebody that could take that position.
Well, when we talk about succession planning, we often like to assume that it's going to be an orderly process and that there's going to be time to onboard someone and to have that mentoring. But unfortunately, sometimes there are other reasons that make you have to have a successor immediately. And you're right, if you don't have financial expertise somewhere else on the board, preferably on the audit committee, that really puts the board in a difficult position.
Yeah. You made mention about defining and keeping the flexibility. As you know, we always think that with your guidelines and your charters, because everything's much more transparent, investors are watching, you need to give yourself as much flexibility as you can so you have room to maneuver and stuff. The other thing you mentioned was about redefining. It's interesting to me that some companies have taken great liberty in calling individuals on their board financial experts. Perfect example, somebody was in banking or might have been the head of a division for a bank 20 years ago. Because they had that background, all of a sudden they're anointed 20 years later as the financial expert for the board. Where, as you and I both know, in the accounting profession, if you haven't kept up with things like that, that is hardly the definition of a financial expert, okay, if there's that kind of gap. So that's not an insignificant issue. At the same time, I would hate to build in more regulations or do stuff relative to that. But as board, you want to have the best person that you can heading that audit committee.
Right, and I think, we've had Sarbanes-Oxley, 12 years, 13 years. And for whatever reason, Congress defined financial expert the way that it was defined, right? So we've got the definition that we have. And I think that we should be looking at the spirit of the definition, maybe not necessarily only the words of the definition. And I think you're right. I think that if I were on a board and I as a shareholder want to make sure that the people on the audit committee, whether they're designated the financial expert or not, understand the financial reporting process end to end, and that there's someone there who has that expertise that really understands how is our company's financial reporting happening, what does our financial report look like, are they accurate, do they tell the complete story? And I think it would be hard to do that, particularly given how global and complex our companies are these days, to do that if you didn't have deep financial expertise.
So this responsibility falls then on the current audit chair to make sure that he's heard during the nominations, and then on the head of the nominating committee and the committee, and possibly if you have an independent chairman of the board as well. Sort of falls on those individuals to make sure that they're doing the proper, due diligence and matrix to have that done. And worst case, if you don't have that kind of leadership, even the CEO should recognize how important that is and be able to do that.
The whole board.
Right.
I would view that as a whole board responsibility. You're right. It's going to fall on the Nom and Gov committee, the chair of the Nom and Gov committee, the current audit committee chair. But it really is a whole board responsibility to make sure everybody on the board fulfills that holistic need of what the company needs.
It's interesting how much this year we seem to be talking about the importance of all the committees and bringing on the right people, and we're seeing discussions about term limits, and there's all kinds of things happening, and if we can stress one thing, the importance of good evaluations, to know that what you have, we've repeated that many times, but it's interesting to see how that is in focus. And if you look at investors, they're speaking to that more and more these days, probably more than ever before.
Well, I think this is a good byproduct of more investor engagement. I think it's good because investors are paying attention to these things, which are really important for the functioning of the company and for shareholder value. And I think investors are exercising their voice more and telling the marketplace and telling companies these things are important to us. So we want to make sure that we have the right expertise on our board, not only in the audit committee, but across the board, right? Do we have the right level of skill sets that are important for this company at this time, given what our risks and strategies are? And I think that's a good discussion.
Yes, I like it when we take a controversial topic and we agree.
And we agree?
Yeah, isn't that great? So thank you again for joining. I love to sort of deal with these important topics. And again, like I said, this is coming up more and more, and we appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.